Hello everyone, this is Professor Robert Solis. Welcome to our next video lesson. We're going to be talking about Visual Basic Lab 31. And in essence, this is talking about a two-dimensional array. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a multiplication table, and in this case it's going to be a 5 by 5, which means we have to enter 25 equations. Well, that's not good. Let's see if we can use a two-dimensional array so that we only have to use one equation, and then we'll just simply use the array to our advantage in terms of populating it with the data. So as soon as the user clicks the Create Table button, then it should automatically populate the various labels here on the screen with the appropriate numbers. So 3 times 5, well, the intersection of 3 and 5 is right here, so we should see the number 15 in that particular label. Okay, so I want you to use the following naming convention, and the idea is this, that LBL11 means row 1, column 1, because in a two-dimensional array, the first number typically is going to be the row, and then the next one is going to be the column. So LBL11 would be this button right here. LBL12 would be this button right here. LBL32, okay, that would be row 3, so it's going to be 1, 2, 3, column 2, which would be right here, the number 6. So this is the naming convention that we're going to use for our various labels. So I've already created this graphical user interface. I'll just show you the properties panel so you can see this really quickly. Notice that this is LBL1, LBL12, LBL13, so forth and so on, all the way up to LBL55 for the 5th row, 5th column. And then of course we have our button, BTN Create, and no minimize, no maximize button, and then multiplication table is the title. Alright, let me go ahead and double click the Create Table. And the first thing that you'll notice that I've done is to create two different constants. See, similarly to a single-dimensional array, we have to establish what the size of the array is. Now, this is typically what we're going to do with most programming languages. They want to know what the size of the array is, but Visual Basic is a little bit different. In this case, when I declare the Visual Basic array size, I have to take into consideration that this is really the last index. So in other words, the first index is always going to be 0. And since row size is 5, what I'm saying is that I'm creating index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, that's 6 elements. So really what I should do is I should probably just go ahead and say subtract 1 from here and subtract 1 from here, because since this is the last element, let me see, this would be 5. 5 minus 1 is 4, so that would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. I just counted with my hand. That would be 5 different elements that I can hold in terms of all the rows, and then 5 for the columns. So this is the declaration of a two-dimensional array. Think of it as a table. In fact, that's what this really is, right? It's a multiplication table. So it's got rows and it's got columns. Well, the first number here represents the rows, and the next number represents the columns. Now this is going to be an array of labels. So this is 25 total, or a 5 by 5 array of labels. It's called label array. I'm going to create a variable for row and column, because I'm going to use that within a nested loop structure to go through every single row and every single column. Alright, now when it comes to assigning all the buttons to an array, so I know that this is LBL1 underscore 1. I'm going to place that into my two-dimensional array starting at 0, 0. So that means row 0, column 0. The next item will go into 0, 1. The next item will go into 0, 2, so forth and so on. So our first rows right here, or our first row of labels, is now been placed into our two-dimensional array, specifically at label 0, comma 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're going to do the same thing for the remaining labels. We're going to place them into our two-dimensional array, and so that's what you see here. Now that all of the labels have been placed to the two-dimensional array, what exactly does that mean? Well, see, this guy right here has two different references. This is like the example that I always say in class. I walk home and my son says daddy and my wife says honey. They're both referring to the same item. Well, this item right here can be referred to as LBL11. Right? So that's the name of this label right here, LBL11. Or we can also call it label array parentheses 0, comma 0, close parentheses, and that also is referring to that same array. So what this statement does is it in essence says these two different ways of representing that label are exactly pointing to the same thing. It's just two different ways of representing the data. All right. Well, now that we have all of these labels, these physical labels are now within an array that holds a bunch of labels, I can use that to my advantage. And here's what I'm going to do. I'll establish a for loop, and so in that for loop we're going to start with row is equal to 0, because you'll notice over here that the array starts with 0. Right? That's going to be our row 0, index 0. And we're going to go all the way to row size minus 1. Now the reason why we do that is because, remember, row size really is the last index. This is a constant, and we know that it's 5. So 5 minus 1 is 4. We'll go from 0 to 4, which is a total of 5 rows. We'll do the same thing for a nested looping statement with columns. And so that'll be column 0 all the way to column size minus 1, which in this case is 5 minus 1, which is 4. So from 0 to 4. All right, so at first column is going to be 0, row is going to be equal to 0. So this is going to be 0, 0. So 0, 0, specifically we are interested in the dot text property. Now notice that if I did lbl5 underscore 5 dot text, you guys wouldn't have a problem with that. You know that that's just simply referring to the text property of this label. Well, we can do the same thing over here. This is nothing more than lbl something. This is a label. Well, that means that it has a dot text property. Well, what is it that I want to do for that dot text property? Well, I want to intersect the row and the column and do the multiplication of those two. And so that's what these guys do over here. They take the row from the row counter, the column from the column counter. Now we know that the first row is going to be 0, the column is going to be 0, so that's offset a little bit. See what I'm talking about? This one is really being placed in the 0, this one is being placed in the 0 in terms of the row and column for the label. So that's going to be offset a little bit. So why don't we do this? Let's add 1 to this, let's add 1 to this, and that's really referring to 1 in 1. Or in other words, it's referring to this label right here. Well, in that case, if we're going to add 1 to it, and we're going to add 1 to it over here, so 0 plus 1 is 1 times 0 plus 1, which is 1. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 gets placed into the string property, or the text property of this particular label text property. And then we keep on doing this for every single row and then every single column, and then automatically the data is going to be populated into our row, into our multiplication table, filled up with a bunch of rows and columns. Let me run the program so we can take a look at it. So when I click the Create button, it automatically populates all the different labels. Okay, well, let's take a look at this so we can see what's happening step by step. What I'm going to do is break the program right here. And I'll go ahead and run it. And again, I'm going to click the Start or click the Create Table button. So you'll see that this label right here, LBL11, is going to be assigned to this particular label. And if I keep on stepping through, you'll see that the same thing's going to happen for all of these different labels. Okay, I'm going to keep on going until we finish right about here with the for statement. So let me continue. Alright, so now we've placed all of these labels into these particular array elements. Okay, if I take a look at label array 44, you see that there is a bunch of different properties that are available. And I can keep on looking over here, and I can even go over here to the text property if I wanted to. If I scroll down, let's see here, this thing is going to have, wow, that's a lot of data. Okay, there we go. So the text property, well, right now, nothing's inside of there. Let's see what happens as we go through the code. All right, row in this case, actually, let me do this. Let me go to debug. Let me go to Windows, and I want to look at autos. Alright, so what this thing does is it shows me automatically all of the data based on what I'm looking at right now. Row is equal to 0, and row size, we know that that's 5. 5 minus 1 is 4. So we're going to step through this. That means we go into that inner for loop, and this nested for loop column is equal to 0 to 5 minus 1, which is 4. So we're going to step inside here. Okay, let's watch what's going to happen. Let me minimize this, and minimize this. Alright, so row, which is 0, plus 1, this whole thing is going to be 1. This whole thing is going to be 1. 1 times 1 is going to be placed in, or it's going to be converted from a string. I'm sorry, it's going to be converted to a string, I should say, and placed into the text property of this array text property. So let me go ahead and step through that. So let's see here, if row is equal to 0, column is equal to 0, the text property should be 1. And there you see it over here where it says 1. Alright, so now we go to the next iteration. Column is now going to be equal to 1. It was 0, so then we go through this again. And then column is going to be equal to 2. We go through this again. and so forth and so on. We keep on going through this until we go back to the row. So column has now been exhausted. Column is equal to 5 because it keeps on increasing. Row was 0. Now it's going to go to 1. As you can see over here, column is equal to 1. Row is equal to 1, I should say. Column is going to be reset now to 0. So let me step through this. There it is. Column is equal to 0. And now we go through our next row through all 5 columns. And then when we're finished, so I can just go ahead and show you here, we have gone through every single row, every single column. So 25 equations has now been reduced to 1 equation within a nested for loop statement. So if I created a 10 by 10 or 100 equations, again I would use the same approach and then just change the row size to 10, the column size to 10, and it would automatically accommodate however many labels I were to place on the screen. And that's it. Okay, so this is Professor Robert Solis. I hope this video lesson was helpful. Have a good day. We'll see you next time.